Hey, Disha.
You folks.
Give it a bit of time.
Hello?
I'm not sure if anyone's joining because I think last time we said that it might be canceled. So for this week.
So should we postpone for the next one?
Yeah, I was gonna give it like five minutes or so, but cause I asked and no one responded. So,
No
um,
worries, no
because I
worries.
think people
I,
might
I I
be.
mean, it makes sense, like first Monday after the holiday. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I think that's why we're like, all right, should we not have this one or not? 'Cause I think people are kind of like catching up on other things. And
yeah, absolutely.
did you have anything specific, Dijon? Did you want to talk about?
Yeah. So we discussed a little bit on the sec. So I met with Mike at Open Source Summit in Vienna, and then talked with
Hmm.
Brandon. Seeing how we can basically move forward and maybe start contributing back and working on Quark version 2.
Yeah.
I wanted to share like where we are, and Mike said that you had like a similar issues that we had with our product, so maybe we can like organize something to you know us getting back to the community and maybe trying to figure out how this all would work, right? So
Hmm.
I don't have anything specific prepared. I just want to like maybe give update to the folks what we been doing, where we are at the moment, and then try to figure out you
Yeah.
know how to do more work in the community. Yeah.
Thanks, man. That sounds good. All right, so Brendan's joining.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hey,
Oh, no.
hey, good morning. So I think we're having this meeting then, or are we not having this meeting?
Wait, what? I mean, I'm
And then
about to cancel meetings. So.
no, I don't
Nobody
like
seems
last time we
super
chat. Like,
enthusiastic about canceling it because we brought it up on last week's meeting, and everyone was like, "Yeah, I'll be there," kind of, yeah, not
yeah,
enthusiastic, but not saying let's cancel. But
yeah, that's why. And I think you brought it up. Remember, like, oh, should we have the Monday's call? Right? If you remember, Brendan, or do you not remember
Yeah. No, I remember. I
that?
remember that.
So,
So it's a agenda my meeting. It should be canceled.
oh,
um, I don't know. I'm happy to talk through stuff that you
yeah.
don't want to talk through. But if we think we wanna, if it's clarifying questions, we can
No,
probably.
it's
But
it. Yes, it's yeah. Dijon was talking about the Guac 2.0 and like how we can proceed and lessons learned and all that kind of stuff. Let's see.
is Jeff able to make it?
Let me see where he. Let me message him. Let's see. I pinged Jeff. So ping Mike real quick. All right, so Jeff is in a clearly defined call. I pinged Mike. Maybe Mike might join. We'll see. I saw Mike is coming on. All right, so we can probably get started then. So I think Dijon, you were there for the community call. Was that last week or the week before?
The week before.
Yeah, where I think where Brendan kind of presented the 2.0. So I guess we can start with the, I guess, lessons learned, I guess. Do you want to start with that first and then kind of move on, or how do you want to kind of talk through this?
Good question, right? So maybe, yeah. So maybe I can give you a context where we are at the moment. And I mean, I don't have any solutions. I you know, just wanted to basically start talking and maybe seeing how to join forces to basically make a common functionality that everybody needs, right? So maybe for the people, but yeah, so year and a half ago, right? We tried, so we were start building like SBO management software at Red Hat, and decided to use Guac as a graph database, right? And we did a POC when there was a Neo4j, right? Stuff in it. So the first one that looked good, right? And then the Guac project completely pivoted from like a graph database to GraphQL API, and just defining the ontology, and we will deal with everything later, right? Which caught us basically in a bad spot, right? Because we were trying to productize something that was a POC at the moment, right? So we had a lot of issues until we managed to get like Ant and Postgres working and things like that. And also at that point there wasn't any search capabilities. I mean, there was any QL in this GraphQL things. So we forked a lot of things and worked on our own to basically satisfy the product requirements, right? And on top of that, we needed some other services that we couldn't get from Guac at the point. So like searching. So our version 1 of the product became very complex. So we had a graph with the database that we couldn't much extend or use, and then we use additional services for the full text search and things like that. So a lot of other people working on this other part of the things weren't too happy, because there was a lot of handover of the things, like getting from the like Guac and GraphQL, then we convert everything to our internal REST APIs, and then hand over all this to UI. You can imagine how well that worked, right? Yeah. So and the other point is that our stuff internally are written in Rust. Guac is in Go, so it's all about microservices and managing all these things, right? So after we delivered all this, there was a lot of internal conversation about how to proceed and how, because like we were end up in things that we couldn't work on the features because we were struggling with the infrastructure all the time, all the API calls and implementing things on our own on the fighting with the GraphQL. But so after a lot of discussions, so basically the team decided to rewrite everything from scratch, right? So like lesson learned, we don't need like a tons of microservices for this. This is like for current purposes simpler application. We want to use Postgres. We want to build like a monolith so that it can easily be run without any Kubernetes or anything, just locally to do what we need, right? And define REST APIs that we need for SBOM and vulnerability management, and start from there, right? So that we can iterate quickly on the features. And like the current notion is that we can scale this Postgres database quite a while until we actually hit some issues and then figure out how to scale it further. So basically we went from top down to the bottom up, and that's why we were quiet in the community. We've done a lot of maintenance work on the version 1, but all the version stuff was for this POC to do like a one single process, model it with Postgres kind of thing. And now everybody is like trying to productize that in our version 2, right? And that's but we don't want, we really want to be this, how to say this, like contribute this back to the community. Like we don't want this to be like a separate effort, because it's a similar use case. What I advocated for us is to at least use the database schema, the same with Guac, but it didn't go that way with other people. So do they want to focus really on what we need to solve these couple of use cases from starters? And now like there's an open questions. And then I talked with Mike in Vienna at Open Source Summit, and he was mentioning as well that there's a lot of talk about how to do things better in V2. And then I talked with Brandon as well on the same topic. And then like the idea is like, okay, can we somehow reuse some of this work that we did for our product, and maybe things that your guys are thinking for V2, and figure out how again to like do this in a single effort, at least on like a common level, what works with everybody. Like in my mind, what I can see is that like maybe these good points would be these APIs that Brandon mentions between like ingesters and the analyze layer. But that's all I have in mind at the moment. I just wanted like say hello again to the community and say like, okay, this is where we are, and like just kick off the conversation. As I said, like I don't have any answers, and so just the willingness to like maybe at some point show you how our things is looking, and what can we reuse. And I know there's like a lot of effort is done in the Guac already in version 1, and you have a product, and Google is using it, so it's not like, okay, let's switch over and start over, but just trying to find a way to figure out how to like start contributing back, and maybe figure out how to base our product on Guac 2, right? So to say, and then we can involve more people actually contributing to the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop talking now.
Yeah. So I think you weren't there for the original conversation, but this is kind of similar. We talked about the 2.0 and then the thing that Brendan kind of put together the plan. We had similar concerns. It's like, okay, we started with GraphQL, but GraphQL had a lot of promises when we first started using it, which it did not deliver on. So I think we overcomplicated the whole project, because like, hey, we can use GraphQL because it's database agnostic, all that kind of stuff. And I think that going down that route, I think made it more complicated. I think we should have stuck with one database, and like whatever one worked, and just like, hey, that's the one everyone's using. Not like, hey, pick and choose your database. I think that just made it a lot more complicated than it needed to be. So I think everyone's kind of on board about, and that's kind of what Brendan kind of showed, is like, hey, just let's move away from the whole GraphQL. And can we make things simpler? Can we just use Postgres, and then so that it's extendable as you need it to be, right? You can query in any way you want to, optimize the queries any way you want to, and sort of use whatever else you can make it very, very customizable. So you have that full GraphQL is very much lacking in the query language portion, and that became evident, right? As it's like, okay, this is too complicated for users. That's why we kind of like, hey, let's make some REST APIs for the users to use, because people are complaining about the GraphQL being too complicated and not doing what they needed to do. So yeah, I think everyone's kind of like on the call is kind of on the same page of, I think the project is more complicated than it needs to be. And we can definitely simplify it. So
Yeah, I think also along that point, right? I think initially when we were thinking about the project, it was like, oh yeah, you have this kind of like pipeline, you have this ecosystem, you have the client tools, and that helps you do everything. So like maybe like the GraphQL stuff wouldn't have mattered that much. But then we realized like both like your Red Hat and then like I think Kusari is also using it in the sense of like, oh, we just want the stuff in the database, and then we have kind of want to interface on that level, right? So I think initially we weren't thinking about that use case where that becomes like a primary usage of just like querying the database. So I think that definitely is something that we recognize is one of the strong points of like what the ingesters and kind of like the data pipeline that we have. And so like making that better and making that more easy to use. So I think like ideally it should be just, we want to make it as easy as like a drop-in replacement for like whatever you have, right? Or like you just like build a very small shim. The lift should be minimal if possible. I think that's the goal, right? Whether we end up with like a database schema, whether we end up with a set of JSON schemas or proto or something like that. I think whichever works best.
I also wonder, like, should we make it like a single binary kind of running thing that people can use, right? Or do we need to make it overly complicated where it's like, oh yeah, this is production ready? Like, I guess I'm not sure where, like, do we want this more developer focused or do we want this more like enterprise focused also?
So I guess, I mean, really, who's the user, right? It kind of goes back to who in the communities is asking for this and what are they looking for. I think the challenge we've run into a little bit is, to some extent, we made it so complicated that the answer that devs struggled to kind of get it working in the first place. But I would caution away from just saying, hey, we're going to put everything all in one and it's now a dev tool or whatever, because then people are going to say, hey, look, I can't run it with the embedded database. I need to use this. I need to use that. I think this goes back to what we had sort of talked about earlier, right? And I would still sort of stress that we look at that, which is Guac, like that we have put in so much great work into the libraries, into the code that's there, right? I think starting to pull out different pieces so that they can stand alone on their own, like, hey, you want to just like, so this is the thing I was telling you before. Some folks at a couple of the conferences recently, like Linux Member Summit and KubeCon, were asking, can I just run the SBOM storage piece as its own thing? Like, I don't want to run anything else in Guac. I just want to store some SBOMs. And so I get that doesn't do a whole lot, but what we still have there is like, no, you're doing stuff where you can discover SBOMs in GitHub releases. You can discover SBOMs that are in OCI. You can pull from other places and aggregate them all in one place. That even just that is a good place to sort of say, great. But I think to your point though, Parth, having something that somebody can run locally or whatever is still useful, but I don't necessarily think that has to be, I can run a complete guac, right? It can be something like, oh, I have, you know, a few hundred small SBOMs and salsa attestations, and I want to run some analysis on them, right? You should be able to do that, right? Like, because some of the folks were talking about that with what they do with DuckDB, right? Some of the Defense Unicorn folks were talking about that, and I've also tested this out, where you can do some pretty nice stuff without necessarily needing to do a whole lot. I think some folks are just asking for, like, if Guac is a set of libraries around this, I can run a couple of commands locally, the same way that, like, you know, you want to go and run SigStore yourself, that takes a whole bunch of components. You have to go and implement them all yourself. But if you want to run Cosine, you could just run Cosine. Granted, yes, Cosine uses a public version, but I think the idea here being that I think that there's certain things that we don't necessarily need the full graph for, that folks are asking for. And again, a lot of that was for folks, you know, folks who came to the Guac later in the development. We had sort of assumed that the state of SBOM tooling and analysis tooling was reasonable at the time. We hadn't really done enough investigation. We hadn't realized that everybody's still, like, stuck at the step of, like, I have one SBOM and I don't know what to do with it. Not I have 100,000 SBOMs and I want to do deep analysis on it. So I think, you know, I would sort of say, why don't we take a look at a couple of pieces that we think we can tease out? I think the API discussion of let's move off the API, like, let's move to a different kind of API, still makes sense. But I think a lot of the value we've put into the ontology and some of the other pieces, I don't want to say, like, it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater or whatever they say.
Yeah, go ahead,
Ethan?
Yusha.
Yeah, so I agree. So basically, yeah, for me, I think Guac is still like a development tool. So if we standardize on the APIs that people can build tools upon, I think that would be, well, yeah, awesome. I mean, I maybe if you have time, maybe not today, but maybe even today, I can show you what we have, and we basically went the same route, right? Like, we have something which is called like a PM mode, like a product manager mode, because our PM was always like, how I run this thing, and then, yeah, you need a AWS account and Kubernetes and everything, and just to, like, import free SBOMs. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? So we can run now everything, like even embedded Postgres in the Rust process that you can just run and like, you know, start doing things, right? So yeah, if you have time today, I can show you what it is. I mean, and I think, like, I'm not the only one that's making decisions here in the name of Red Hat, but I can say that I think everybody is on board that, you know, we are willing to donate all of this to the community if that makes sense to the community, right? Not pushing that this should be, you know, anything more than it is, but whatever you see of the value is something that we are willing to contribute to, donate, or whatever, right?
Awesome. I'd be very curious to see it.
Yeah, same.
Cool.
But-
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I'm very interested because a couple of us have also just been poking around with embedded Postgres inside of Rust, just interested in also seeing some of that. But also, I think yeah, I like, one of the things I think this is something I sort of wrote up on my own just as a side thing of, like, when you need the graph, things get expensive, but when you don't need the graph, you can make a lot of stuff very inexpensive. And so like, as an example, I can scan like 35 gigs of SBOM for vulnerabilities in like 90 seconds on my laptop. If all I'm looking for is vulnerabilities, if I start to go and say, oh no, generate an entire graph out of that and yada, yada, okay, now wait a couple hours. But if I'm just saying, hey, find me all this. And so I'm curious what we can do to sort of say, oh, here are some, you have the simpler use cases. You can run this on your laptop. It's going to be no big deal.
Yeah. That makes sense. Let me see how to share the right screen. Good. Where are you? Okay. You guys can see it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, is it running? It is. Cool. So this is it. This is basically, I'm running it locally. So I'm not running the full PM mode. This is more like a development mode when I have just a Postgres database running locally, and then starting a process, which is like a single RAS process with a backend. And it also automatically starts the JavaScript UI that we have, right? Where should I start? So we have, for example, what's different than you did before is that we implemented like a concept of importers directly into the application. Before all this were basically Kubernetes jobs and cron jobs trying to do things. So right now everything went with the idea that at some point the admin of the app would be able to turn on all these kind of different importers to basically start importing SBOMs from different repositories, CVs, OSV data, whatever, CISA files, WEX document. It should be all configurable through the API and the application. So it's a part of the application, right? So this is the first point where this goes from this idea that it's all tools, but we can talk about it. The other thing, I think, which is a big difference between the how the Guac world works, and this is that there was a concept of like, let's try to not depend on external APIs as much as you can, right? So because going with Guac, you would ingest something, you would pass this through the gRPC or nets for the service to call OSV and to get things back, right? Where things can get, then the SLA of your application is basically SLA of the OSV API, right? So the idea was like OSVI is also like a aggregator, right, for different kind of sources that exports things in the OSVI formats. So basically, the idea was like, let's go to the sources directly, right? So instead of going to the API, you can go directly to the GitHub projects and import data directly from the repo, import everything, have it all locally in the database, which also can help with the air-gapped environments. So you don't need any external things. The other thing is everything else is pretty much similar. So you can import the SBOM from the repository. You can upload it to the API or the UI as well. It should show somewhere. You can then have all the packages and pearls. You can match all the vulnerabilities you can find for it, and going back and forth. So nothing super fancy in terms of functionality at the moment. I think one also big change that we did in the model, I think why why people didn't opt up for Guac database schema at the moment is like this notion between what's the vulnerability, what's the advisory, right? And we ended up with the basically with the world of view is that everything is advisory, right? So the CV is the CV ID, identifier for some vulnerabilities that somebody somebody found, and then everything else is somebody's opinion about that vulnerability. So that's the advisory. So even the like a CV record is like a low level advisory. That's the original researcher view of this vulnerability, right? So that's one of big changes I think in the API in the database models. And
Are you saying that so you have like the CVE and then you're associating, are you doing the linking directly to the SBOM, or you're using like a scanner result to kind of do the mapping? Is that what you're saying is a difference, or something else?
No. So we can find link through the like OSV data, right? That we can import to the CSEF advisories and things like that. So we will store that in the database, right? So that's all good and well. But basically we can have like multiple advisories for the same vulnerability. So saying like Red Hat thinks this, right? So our advisory is one thing, Oracle can do another thing, Google can do the third thing. So at the moment we don't have that implemented, but the idea is that you can then show to the people like, okay, this is all we know about this vulnerability. So these different organizations think about this. They can have different advisories, right? In the end, and then the folks who are looking at it's their decision finally to make. Am I affected or not? Do I trust more one organization or the other? But in the model, you can have like a multiple advisories for same vulnerability, right?
Gotcha. So I guess like I think this is similar to the we changed it to have the vulnerability metadata ingestion spec. Okay, yeah, but I think I got it. Thanks.
Yeah. So, and this is what we are trying to productize now. So in the next couple of months, we will basically focus on this kind of feature set, but it's just a basic feature set to have like a comparable thing with what we have in version 1, just much easier to develop and maintain and basically not requiring any cloud to run this if you don't need it, so you can embed it in multiple different environments. Some of the things that are thinking what we also missed in original Guac is basically a concept of a product, because a lot of customers that we are talking to, but also our internal product security teams are thinking about it. So like this is my product, this is the versions of my product, and this basically SBOM describe this SBOM, or now thinking more, this set of SBOMs describe this particular version of the product, right? So you want to have this kind of grouping of SBOMs by different organizations, products, being able easily to search that. What we hear more is that people want to have also track more of these product things in terms of like, okay, like this vulnerability, but what versions are supported? Give me just the last version. Find me vulnerabilities only in latest versions. I don't care about older stuff and things like that. So all these kind of things is something that we would like to focus on next and see that. Marco, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I think with what you mentioned here, and you also mentioned it previously, seems like there's a conflict between product requirements in general and say the Guac's ontology. And like the ontology has been developed through everyone here is like expertise in supply chain security. But I think that in some cases that has led it to become more like say missing things or a little bit more too complicated. And this might result in maybe such as in this case, like not even using it when developing a product because it's like the gap between the product requirements and the ontology is too big. Do you think that that like describes your like what happened here, that there is a pretty large gap there?
I think there was a gap, yeah, 6 months ago, and then there was a decision made internally to try this rewrite, right? So yeah, I personally don't think it's not workable, right? I was advocating for let's use the. I think maybe the issue is that we try to define ontology on the API level, on the level of the GraphQL, right? I mean, I was to me that's more like a database schema and maybe the codes is where we should have defined these kind of things and relations, and we would be able to iterate more quickly and then base the API on top of those, right? And yeah, my concern now that we are now too diverged to like do this kind of easily, but let's let's start, right? Let's maybe go then from the top down. Let's work on the APIs that we can commonly share, and then figure out things beneath. I don't know. I mean, again, I don't have any answers. Just trying to kick off the discussion, show you where we are, and figure out things.
Yeah.
But basically, big things for us for Guac was that first of all, there wasn't any database implementation. We did it, but it already caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. That it get bad taste internally, and then what we missed was search, right? Which we did on our own, and now I think Marco is working a lot on contributing a lot of these things back through the REST API. And yeah, a couple of things missing from the ontology, like anything. One of the thing is that like Guac, but I also think our new schema is too Perl specific, which is maybe cool and fancy, but the world, especially like the older stuff, is not not only Perls. So and especially talking about the products, there's a lot of these CPs kind of things that we need to handle and map somehow to the packages and things like that. What we also worked a lot on recently is that, for example, advisories can be pretty vague. So I'm just not venting out, throwing everything out, so feel free to stop me anytime. For example, advisories can talk about only a product, saying like, we know that, for example, OpenShift, this version is affected, and that's all we know at the moment. And then this advisory is like a living thing. So thing is like next advisory now we know that maybe some packages inside of this is affected, but we don't know exactly Perls. So we know like a Vim in OpenShift container image is affected, and that's the advisory, and we need to somehow like show this to people, even if it's not a full information. And then the third version of advisory will come and say, okay, like this is the exact version and the Perl, and then we can now say it. But for WAC or any kind of this kind of database to be used by like a product security teams, they need to have this kind of like a vagueness in how we match things, but also have like this kind of like a time component to it. Like this is how this advisory change over time and becoming more specific. And like the next one is okay, now it's fixed, right? In this version. So we need to be able to show this to people, like going how this incident basically evolved over time, right? So that's some of the issues that we couldn't solve with WAC normally because we didn't focus on it. And what we are trying to solve basically with this and future versions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? And I recently also was working on some another case where we had a bunch of data sources about the same objects with like different things. It's around like Git repositories internally, and basically I feel like what we ended up with is you record the event and aggregate the event, and then you kind of also have like, so you have like the stage one of what the ontology like tries to be, and then you have like almost a second layer, which is like at any point in time I want to kind of set a opinionated view of the world based on the events I've seen, and kind of aggregate that knowledge, right? Because like we don't want people to have to like go through the data and then reapply a policy or like how they'll make decisions on it. We want to say like, here's opinionated view, here's what the advisory currently says now, what does it mean for you? So I think that may be something that where between what you're describing, where you have the data coming in and then you do some processing on it in order to provide a different view on it, and like the stuff between the GraphQL API and the REST API, right? It seems like there is this like double layered pipeline that needs to exist, right? And I think it makes sense for us to make it usable that way. So I think that I think that's a good point. The one other thing I want to mention is I think what you presented was really nice in the sense of like, I think that solved a very big problem in terms of you're basically making orchestration of the infrastructure easy, right? So you have a bunch of collectors, switch it on. This reminds me a bit like Keycloak. Keycloak has that kind of interface where like you go in, you switch something on, you enable things. You can install plugins and stuff like that. So that kind of manages the ecosystem, right? And in this sense, like the ecosystem is managed all within, I'm guessing, that single Rust binary or a couple binaries. But I imagine that we should make it easy for you to have things being developed in the community to be able to plug into that, right? If someone writes an OCI collector, you should be able to plug into that easily, and that should just be another row in your enable importer. But yeah, I think that orchestration interface and like that hub to bring everything together, it like greatly solves like the usability problem that I think a lot of people have.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I know we had sort of we discussed also in OSS EU and also here was one of the things that like there's nothing to, the graph itself is still very useful, but as far as like some of those initial things go, it can be a little sort of daunting. And I think the thing that is, I think there's a lot of prior art in the space of, I'm just gonna put it in air quotes there, big data, of like things like Spark and things like a bunch of those other sorts of tools of, hey, we can ingest the data multiple times into multiple different views that require it, right? I don't think there's anything to stop somebody from saying, oh, Guac, the first step is we throw everything in some sort of cache or some sort of bucket, and then we start to do processing at different levels. And that processing should be as asynchronous as possible so that, we don't block somebody from one level of analysis before all analysis is done. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot we can do there. And but I agree about like but making it a little bit more pluggable, I guess, and less like synchronously, like if we have to certify everything before it even makes its way into the graph, like that sort of stuff.
Just want to mention about the graph. So one of the colleagues play with the idea to like so everything is the database. We use queries for a lot of things, but for graph analysis, one of the colleagues play with the idea to create like so to say on-demand graphs, right? So when you need it in memory, right? And I didn't try it, so take all this with a grain of salt, but his initial reports are that this works pretty well, even for the like a large SBOMs and like some scale of like 1,000 of SBOMs. If you load everything in memory, just for searching for graph things, it's super fast. It doesn't take too much RAM. So basically, it's reasonably scalable. So for graph operations, just create your own on-demand graph when you need it, and use the database. But it could be the same, like as Mike said, like put this thing in graph database as well, if for operations that requires intensive graphing. But for most, 80% of the data and use cases and things like that, the SQL will do the work. Right? That's the current approach that people here are looking at.
Yeah, I think we just need to provide a good filter to get what needs to be put in the graph. And I think that's I think that's what we ended up with the SBOM predicate, right? We ended up just stuffing that all the edges and all the nodes within that predicate to say that, oh, if you want to look at this SBOM, here's a graph for it. Go do the analysis for yourself. We just give you the entire thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the use cases, the graph is overkill, right? Like for some of the simple use cases, like vulnerabilities and license information, all that kind of stuff. And when you actually want to do like, no one right at this point, I don't think anyone's doing the, like, oh, I want to do some analysis into some of this stuff, like large scale analysis. So I think that's where kind of Guac is like, oh, we started with this complex problem, which no one was trying to solve, and then we tried to shoehorn in the, like, okay, now we can do vulnerability scanning and all this other kind of stuff. And people are just like, hey, I have an SBOM or have a couple SBOMs, just give me basic information about it. And I think that's what the use case was. And I think it was too complicated for that use case.
And what we also notice is that the most SBOMs people have at the moment are very shallow. So one max. So yeah.
Or it's flat and you don't really see
it's super flat. Yeah. So probably that will change as the industry matures, but yeah, we should, I guess, solve today's problems, right?
So I see we have like a little bit less than 10 minutes left. I do want to get into the detail of like what you're doing, and like I think what you presented kind of makes sense. Is in line with like what I think the project wants to solve, right? And I think if you can collect all that input, and maybe that schema can be, you can look at it and be like, yeah, maybe this should be what the new schema looks like, right? I'm kind of interested to explore more what that can look like, right? Both in terms of how do we what the schema should be to make it easier for you to kind of use, and also from the perspective of how can we make the pieces that we've built with the ingesters and collectors work better with, if you have the interface to like add collectors or add ingesters and things like that, like how do we make that the integration easier?
Cool. So I don't know where to. Maybe we can continue this kind of conversation. So this is all super early. We basically don't have any documentation at the moment that I can point you to, because everybody's focus is just now to like do this kind of thing, whatever you think we can do to share this and move forward. I think that there's a lot of willingness from our side to move forward with all this. So open to ideas. Yeah.
I feel like maybe like in-depth like architecture and like what's going on. This is the schema, and maybe we can be like, yeah, that makes sense. How do we adapt the 2.0 ontology to look more like that? Or like maybe if we have to.
Cool.
Yeah.
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 I think it's going to have to be like, we dedicate some of these Guac maintainer calls, for the coming weeks. Like, hey, let's sit down and what is the architecture going to be? And, how does trustification currently do it? Do we take some ideas from there? And how do we make it compatible for everybody and make sure that it's usable, right? So I think we just change some of these maintainer calls just to be like, hey, let's figure out 2.0 and let's start drawing stuff on a board basically and figuring it all out. Lessons learned from trustification and future extensibility, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that it's not too complicated and it's at the same time as extendable as any user or enterprise would want it to be.
Yeah, okay. So I'll get back to our team, and maybe our first step is to try to get some of this developer documentation, and then we can go through it and start talking here.
I have a question, and maybe I don't know whether you have answered this. Is there any part of what you showed where you don't want it to be open source?
No, everything.
Okay.
What you saw now, it's all on GitHub, and the product is just another build of the open source stuff. So
okay, sounds great. Then
I collect all this data and there's the code and try to build some of the documentation, and maybe we'll have something by the next week.
Cool. No, I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks for
Awesome.
listening to my ramblings. and I'm really glad that you think there could be a way to do this properly going forward.
Yeah, I think everyone's on the same page. So I think everyone wants to, make it easier, make it more extensible, all that stuff. So yeah.
I think having the 2.0 as a greenfield provides a, a very promising kind of integration. Sorry.
I mean, and then, you know, migration from 1.0 to 2.0 is just re-ingest your response. Right. So it's simple enough. So like, hey, no data migration or nothing. Just you have your response already, just go re-ingest them all and you're done.
That's what we are doing as well. Yeah. So no, yeah, the original documents are the source of truth.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Sounds good. Did anyone else anything else? We have like 3 minutes left, but okay, so let's make the next meeting more like a working meeting and kind of start designing the 2.0, start talking through it and so forth.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And if even if there's no documentation ready to join, I don't know whether like if there's just a Postgres schema that's like
Yeah.
good enough.
Yeah. If there's nothing else, I can walk you through, you know, how things run and everything, so that people can try it on their own and play with stuff.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Thanks.